Benjamin never wanted to inherit his Uncle Roger's house. But the will left him no choice. The small property sat on the edge of White Pines. It was a town so quiet that even the wind seemed to whisper instead of howl. The house was old, built in the 1950s, with cracked wooden siding and a roof that sagged in the middle like a tired spine. Benjamin moved in during early November, when the days were short and the fog rolled in from the nearby river before sunset. He had no family left. Roger had been his mother's brother, a man Benjamin barely remembered from childhood visits, awkward dinners, and the smell of tobacco and old books. Roger died alone in a hospital 60 miles away. The lawyer said the house had been paid off for decades. So Benjamin packed a single bag and drove north until the paved roads turned to gravel and then to dirt. White Pines had no grocery store and no gas station. There were just 12 houses scattered along a frozen creek and a wooden church with a bell that no one rang anymore. The neighbors were old and kept to themselves. Margaret lived across the muddy road. She was a widow in her 70s who spent her days knitting by a window that faced Benjamin's front door. She waved once when he arrived and then never spoke to him again. Benjamin did not mind. He preferred the silence. The first night was uneventful. He ate cold soup from a can and slept on a mattress he found in the bedroom closet. But the second night changed everything. It started with a creak, then another, then the slow, dragging sound of footsteps coming from directly above his head. The attic. Benjamin froze in bed, his eyes open in the dark. The ceiling was made of old plaster with a single hatch that had been nailed shut with thick wooden planks. He had noticed it during his first walkthrough and assumed it was just storage. But now, lying in the dark, he realized that the footsteps were not random. They followed a pattern. Step, drag, pause, then repeat. Exactly the same rhythm. He checked his phone. It was midnight. The sounds continued for exactly 47 minutes and then stopped. Benjamin did not sleep. The next morning, he examined the attic hatch from below. The planks were covered in dust so thick that no one had touched them in years. There was no ladder, no pull cord, no way for anyone to get up there. And yet, the footsteps had been unmistakable. He told himself it was the house settling, old wood expanding and contracting. But that explanation felt weak, even to his own ears. He decided to ask Margaret, the neighbor. He crossed the road in the gray afternoon light and knocked on her door. She opened it just wide enough to show one eye and a strand of white hair. Benjamin asked about the house, about Roger, about any strange noises. Margaret stared at him for a long moment and then said, "You did not know, did you?" Benjamin said no what? She closed the door without another word. That night, the footsteps returned exactly at midnight. Step, drag. The same slow, deliberate pace. Benjamin stood under the hatch this time, his ear pressed to the cold plaster. He could feel the vibrations traveling through the wood. Something was moving up there, something heavy enough to make the ceiling groan. He grabbed a flashlight and a hammer from the kitchen drawer. He pried off one plank, then another. The nails came out with a screech that hurt his teeth. Dust poured down like gray snow. When the last plank fell to the floor, Benjamin pulled the hatch open. A black square opened above him. The smell hit him first, old fabric, dried air, and something sweet, like withered flowers. He aimed the flashlight into the darkness and saw a short wooden ladder attached to the inside of the hatch. He had not expected that. He climbed. Each rung creaked under his weight. Then he was inside. The attic was not an empty storage space. It was a room. A small, finished room with walls painted a faded yellow and a single window on the far wall. But the window was fake, painted onto the plaster. A blue sky with white clouds that had been there for decades, never changing. There was a narrow bed with a metal frame, covered in a thin gray blanket. A wooden table held a ceramic plate and a tin cup, both perfectly clean, as if waiting for someone to return. On the floor, near the foot of the bed, lay a small leather diary. Its cover was cracked and peeling. Benjamin knelt and picked it up, his hands trembling. The pages were yellow and brittle, filled with handwriting in pencil. The letters were round and uneven, the handwriting of a child. The first page read, "My name is Grace, and I have been here for 127 days." Benjamin dropped the diary, then picked it up again. He turned page after page. Each entry was shorter than the last. Grace wrote about the man she called Uncle Roger. She wrote that he brought her food every morning and took away the bucket at night. She wrote that he told her the outside world was dangerous and that she had to stay hidden to be safe. She wrote that she missed her mother, but that her mother was gone. Roger said he was the only one who could protect her now. The last entry was dated over 25 years ago. It said, "He told me we are leaving tomorrow. I heard him on the telephone downstairs. He said the name of a city. I do not know where that is. I am scared, but I will be brave." Grace did not finish the sentence. The pencil line trailed off into a wavy scratch, as if someone had snatched the book from her hands. Benjamin sat on the dusty floor, the diary in his lap, and tried to understand. Roger had kept a child locked in this attic. A little girl named Grace. And no one in White Pines had ever known. Or maybe someone had known. Maybe Margaret knew. Maybe that was why she closed the door in his face. Benjamin looked around the room again, searching for more clues. Under the bed he found a small metal box, rusted shut. He pried it open with the hammer. Inside were 3 items: a single child's shoe, a ribbon the color of faded pink, and a photograph. The photograph showed 2 people, a young woman holding a baby. The woman's face had been scratched out with a sharp object, but the baby was still visible. A tiny face with dark hair and wide eyes. Written on the back in ink were the words, "Grace, age 6 months, before they took her." Benjamin did not know who they were, but he understood that Roger was not the beginning of the story. Only the middle. Someone had taken Grace from her mother, and Roger had hidden her here, in this painted room with no windows. For how long? The diary said 127 days. But the last entry was not the end. What happened after that? Benjamin needed to know. He climbed down from the attic and resealed the hatch with the planks, hammering the nails back into place. He did not sleep that night either. He sat at the kitchen table with the diary open in front of him and read every word 3 times. Grace wrote about the sound of rain on the roof, about the birds she could hear through the fake window, about the games she played with her shadow on the wall. She never cried in her writing. She never screamed. She was obedient and small and terribly alone. And Roger. Gentle, quiet Roger, who worked at the paper mill until it closed, who came to family dinners with a polite smile, who never married and never had children. Roger had built this room. Or had he inherited it from someone else? Benjamin realized he did not know his uncle at all. The next morning, he went back to Margaret's house. This time he did not knock. He waited by her garden gate until she came out to fetch her mail. She saw him and stopped, her hands tightening around the envelopes. Benjamin held up the diary. Margaret's face turned white as the winter snow. She whispered, "You found it." Benjamin said, "I found everything." Who was Grace? Margaret looked at the ground for a long time, then opened her gate and let him inside. Her house smelled of lavender and old paper. She led him to a wooden rocking chair by the window and sat across from him on a worn sofa. She said, "I knew Roger for 40 years. We grew up together. He was always quiet, always alone. But he was not a bad man, not at first." Benjamin said, "He kept a child locked in an attic." Margaret closed her eyes and said, "That child was not his. She was given to him." Benjamin felt his stomach turn. Given. Margaret said, "There was a woman who lived in the city 200 miles south. She had a daughter named Grace. The woman got involved with dangerous people, people who traded children for money in silence. Roger was a courier. He never hurt anyone. He just moved things from one place to another. But one night, the woman begged him to take Grace and hide her, because they were coming to take her away forever. Roger did not know what else to do. So he brought the girl here, to White Pines, to this house. And he kept her in the attic until he could figure out how to save her." Benjamin said, "But he never saved her." Margaret shook her head. "No. The people found her anyway. They came one night. Roger tried to fight them, but there were too many. They took Grace. And they told Roger that if he ever spoke about it, they would kill him too. Roger never reported it. He never told anyone. He just shut the attic, nailed it closed, and lived with the silence for 25 years. Benjamin asked, "What about Grace's mother?" Margaret said, "She died 6 months before Roger brought the girl. The dangerous people killed her. That was why they wanted Grace, to erase all evidence." Benjamin's hands were shaking. He said, "So Grace is dead?" Margaret looked at him with wet eyes and said, "I do not know. No one ever found a body. No one ever found anything. Roger searched for her for years in secret, driving to the city, following old leads. But he never found her. Then he got sick. He stopped leaving the house. And he died with her name on his lips." Benjamin stood up. He felt something harden inside him, a decision forming. He said, "I am going to find out what happened to Grace." Margaret grabbed his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She said, "Those people may still be alive. They may still be looking for anyone who remembers. You are not Roger. You are not prepared for what you might find." Benjamin pulled his hand away and said, "Then I will become prepared." And he walked out of her house into the gray November light. Benjamin spent the next 3 days searching every corner of Roger's house. He tore up floorboards, emptied closets, and pulled furniture away from walls. He found more photographs hidden inside a hollowed-out book on Roger's bedroom shelf. The photographs showed a young woman with dark hair and tired eyes holding a baby in a hospital room. Written on the back was the name Clara and the date. Grace's mother. Another photograph showed Roger standing next to a blue car in a city street. A little girl sat in the back seat, her face blurred by motion. Grace was alive in that image, her hand pressed against the window. Benjamin also found a folded map of the state with a small circle drawn around a town called Millbrook, 200 miles south. The same city Margaret had mentioned. A worn business card was tucked behind the map. It belonged to a private investigator named Frank Marshall with an address in Millbrook and a phone number that had been disconnected 20 years ago. Benjamin decided to drive to Millbrook. He packed a bag, filled his car with gas at the last station before the highway, and drove south through forests and farmland until the landscape changed into suburbs and then into the gray concrete of the city. Millbrook was not large, but it was larger than White Pines. It had traffic lights, strip malls, and people who did not wave at strangers. Benjamin found the address on the business card. It was an old brick building with a pawn shop on the ground floor and empty offices above. The private investigator was long gone, but the pawn shop owner, a bald man with gold rings on his fingers, remembered Frank Marshall. He said Frank died 10 years ago, but his daughter still lived in town. She worked at the public library on Main Street. Benjamin drove to the library. It was a squat building with large windows and a sign that read Millbrook Public Library, founded 1962. Inside, the smell of old paper was overwhelming. He asked the front desk for Frank Marshall's daughter. A woman in her late 40s with short gray hair and sharp green eyes stepped forward. Her name was Laura. She said, "You are the second person this month to ask about my father." Benjamin said, "Who was the first?" Laura studied his face for a moment and then said, "Come with me." She led him to a small office in the back, filled with boxes of documents and yellowed newspapers. She closed the door and said, "A man came to see me 3 weeks ago. He was old, maybe 70, with a limp and a scar on his neck. He asked the same questions you are about to ask. About a little girl named Grace. About a woman named Clara. About a disappearance that never made the news." Benjamin felt his heart jump. "What did you tell him?" Laura said, "I told him the truth. My father worked on the Grace case for 5 years. He never solved it, but he left behind a box of evidence. And I have kept it safe." She pulled a cardboard box from under her desk. It was tied with brown string and dusty. Benjamin opened it carefully. Inside were police reports, witness statements, and a series of photographs that made his blood run cold. The photographs showed a house on the outskirts of Millbrook, a small white house with a green door and a chain-link fence. In one photograph, a woman's body lay on the living room floor. Her face was covered with a sheet, but her hand was visible. On her wrist was a bracelet with the name Clara. Grace's mother had been found dead in that house. The police report said she died from blunt force trauma, and the case went cold because no one would talk. No witnesses, no fingerprints, nothing. The woman had no family, no job, no friends who would come forward. And her daughter, Grace, was never found. The police assumed the girl died with her mother, but there was no body, no blood, no sign of a child anywhere in the house. Benjamin asked, "What did the stranger want?" Laura said, "He wanted the address of that house. He said he had been looking for Grace for a very long time. He owed a debt to someone, and he needed to know if she was still alive." Benjamin asked, "Did you give him the address?" Laura nodded. "Yes. I gave it to him 3 weeks ago." Benjamin left the library with the box of evidence under his arm. Laura had let him borrow it, saying she wanted the truth to come out before she died. He drove to the address on the police report. The White House with the green door was still standing, but it was abandoned now. The windows were boarded, and the chain-link fence had rusted through. Benjamin parked across the street and got out. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly elderly people and empty lots. He walked up to the house and tried the front door. It was locked, but the back door was not. It opened with a soft push into a kitchen that had not been updated in 50 years. Green appliances, linoleum floors, a calendar on the wall from 1993. Benjamin moved through the house slowly. The living room was empty except for a single wooden chair in the corner. The carpet had been removed long ago, leaving bare concrete stained with dark patches. He knelt and touched one of the stains. It did not come off. He knew what it was. He stood up and continued searching. In the bedroom, he found a closet with a false back. Behind it was a small crawl space just big enough for a child. Inside the crawl space, he found a child's drawing taped to the wall. A crayon picture of two stick figures holding hands, one tall and one small, with the word mommy written in shaky letters. Benjamin took the drawing and put it in his pocket. He searched the rest of the house but found nothing else. No bones, no clothes, no diary. Just the silence of a tragedy that had been erased. He sat on the back steps of the house and looked at the overgrown yard. A faded plastic slide stood near a dead tree, half buried in weeds. Someone had played here once. A little girl named Grace, before she was taken, before she was hidden in an attic 100 miles away, before she vanished into thin air. Benjamin took out his phone and searched online for any mention of Grace. But there was nothing. No missing person report, no news article, no social media post. The girl had never existed as far as the world was concerned. He thought about Roger, about the diary he had found in the attic, about the last entry where Grace said they were leaving tomorrow. And he realized that Roger had tried to save her. He had tried to move her somewhere safer, but someone had stopped him. Maybe the same people who killed Clara. Maybe the same people who erased Grace entirely. Benjamin returned to White Pines that night, exhausted and angry. He went into the attic again, this time with a crowbar and a hammer. He removed the planks and climbed up. He sat on the narrow bed and held the diary in his hands. He read the last entry again and again. He heard him on the telephone downstairs. He said the name of a city. Roger had been planning to take Grace somewhere, but the diary ended mid-sentence, as if Grace had been interrupted. Benjamin looked at the floor of the attic, at the wooden planks beneath the bed. He had not dug here before. He had only found the items under the mattress. But now he wondered if Roger had hidden something else. He took the crowbar and pried up the floorboards one by one. Beneath the third board, he found a gap in the subfloor. Inside the gap was a metal lockbox, smaller than the first, newer, with a combination lock. Benjamin tried Roger's birthday, then his mother's birthday, then the date of the last diary entry. None worked. He tried Grace's name as numbers, 721. Nothing. He sat back, thinking. Then he remembered something Margaret had said. Roger searched for her for years. He never found her. Maybe the combination was the year Grace disappeared. 1993. He tried it. The lock clicked open. Inside the box was a single photograph and a letter. The photograph showed a teenage girl, maybe 15 or 16, with long dark hair and tired eyes, standing in front of a school bus. She looked nothing like the baby in the old photograph, but something in her expression reminded Benjamin of Clara. The same slight smile, the same sadness behind the eyes. Written on the back of the photograph was the name Grace, followed by a date from 12 years ago. The letter was from Roger to someone named Paul. It said, "I found her. She is alive and living in a town called Ashfield. She does not remember me. She does not remember anything before the age of 6. She has a new family, a new name. I will not contact her. That would only put her at risk. But I wanted you to know that I kept my promise. I protected her, even if she will never know. Benjamin read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking. Grace was alive. Roger had found her 12 years ago, and he had done nothing. He had let her live her life in secret, never revealing himself, never explaining. He had carried the weight of that attic alone for decades. And then he had died with the secret still inside him. Benjamin looked at the photograph again, the teenage girl with dark hair. She would be in her late 20s now, maybe married, maybe with children of her own. She had survived. She had escaped the people who killed her mother, and she had built a life without knowing any of it. Benjamin put the photograph and the letter back in the lockbox and closed it. He sat in the dark attic for a long time, listening to the wind outside the fake window. And he made a decision. Benjamin decided not to find Grace. He would not track her down. He would not knock on her door. He would not tell her that her real name was Grace and that her mother had been murdered and that she had spent months locked in an attic. That knowledge would destroy her. He understood that now. Roger had been right to stay silent. Some truths were too heavy for a person to carry. Benjamin gathered all the evidence, the diary, the photographs, the letters, the box from the attic. He put them in a large duffel bag. He drove to the river that ran past White Pines. It was a cold, dark river that flowed through the forest and into a lake 20 miles south. He walked to the middle of the old wooden bridge and looked down at the water. It was deep and fast, and he knew that no one would ever find what he was about to throw away. He took out the diary first, the small leather book with Grace's handwriting. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of her words, "I have been here for 127 days." Then he dropped it into the river. It floated for a second, then sank beneath the dark water. He threw the photographs next, one by one. Clara holding baby Grace, the woman's face scratched out. Roger standing by the blue car. The teenage girl in front of the school bus. They all disappeared into the current. Then the letters, the lockbox, the metal box with the child's shoe and the pink ribbon. All of it, gone. Benjamin stood on the bridge until his hands were empty and his pockets were empty and the duffel bag was just a crumpled piece of canvas at his feet. He stayed there for a long time, watching the water. Then he walked back to the house. The next morning, he called a real estate agent and put the house up for sale. He did not mention the attic. He did not mention Roger or Grace or any of it. He just said he needed to leave White Pines and never come back. The house sold within a month to a young couple from the city who saw the low price and the quiet location and thought they had found a hidden gem. Benjamin signed the papers and handed over the keys without a word. He moved to a small apartment in a town 300 miles away. He found a job at a hardware store and made no friends. He did not want friends. He wanted silence. But the silence did not come. Every night at midnight, Benjamin woke up. His eyes open, his ears straining for the sound of footsteps. But there were no footsteps in his new apartment. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the distant growl of traffic. And yet, he could not stop listening. He could not stop waiting. He had destroyed the evidence, but he could not destroy the memory. The memory of a small room with a painted window. Of a child's diary found under a mattress. Of a name written in pencil on yellow paper, Grace. he began to have nightmares. In the nightmares, he was the one in the attic. He was the one sitting on the narrow bed, waiting for someone to bring food, waiting for someone to open the hatch, waiting for the footsteps to stop. He woke up sweating, his throat raw, his hands clutching the sheets. He knew that Roger had suffered the same way. Roger had lived with these nightmares for 25 years, until the cancer ate him from the inside. Benjamin understood now why Roger had never thrown away the evidence. Why he had kept the diary and the photographs hidden in the house instead of burning them. Because the evidence was the only proof that Grace had been real. That she had existed. That her suffering had mattered. And by throwing it all into the river, Benjamin had erased her again. He had become like the people who took her. Not a criminal, but a silencer. A forgetter. A man who chose convenience over truth. 6 months after selling the house, Benjamin received a letter. The envelope was plain white with no return address. The postmark was from Millbrook, the same city where Grace's mother had died. He opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed words. It said, "We know you found the box. We know you destroyed the evidence. We have been watching you since you visited the library. Do not look for Grace. Do not speak her name. Do not return to White Pines. If you do, you will disappear like she almost did. This is your only warning." Benjamin read the letter 3 times, then placed it on his kitchen table and stared at it. He understood now that the dangerous people, the ones who killed Clara and took Grace, were still active. Still watching. Still willing to erase anyone who got too close. The old man with the limp and the scar on his neck, the one who visited Laura at the library. That man was not trying to save Grace. He was trying to find her for them. Benjamin had led them right to the evidence by asking questions, by digging into the past, by being foolish enough to believe that justice still existed. He had put Grace at risk. He had put himself at risk. And the only reason he was still alive was because he had destroyed everything. He had given them nothing to use. He picked up the letter and took it to the kitchen sink. He held a lighter to the corner and watched the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. He washed the ash down the drain and went back to bed. He slept until morning without dreaming. But the peace did not last. 2 weeks later, he saw a man standing across the street from his apartment building. The man was old, with a limp and a scar on his neck. He wore a gray coat and a hat pulled low. He did not move. He just stood there, watching Benjamin's window. Benjamin closed the curtains and called no one. There was no one to call. The police would not believe him, and even if they did, the man would just vanish and reappear somewhere else. Benjamin waited by the window for an hour. Then the man walked away and did not come back. But Benjamin knew that was not the end. They would always be watching now, waiting for him to make a mistake, to say the wrong name, to lead them to Grace. He decided to disappear himself. He quit his job, packed a single bag, and drove west. Farther than he had ever been, through mountains and deserts until the towns became smaller and the roads became fewer. He ended up in a rented room above a garage in a town called Stillwater, population 300. No one asked his name. No one cared where he came from. He changed his phone number, deleted his email, and told no one where he had gone. He lived on cash and kept the curtains closed. At night, he still woke up at midnight, but the footsteps were gone. Replaced by the sound of his own heartbeat. He wondered if Grace was alive. If she had children. If she ever looked at old photographs and felt a strange emptiness she could not explain. He wondered if Roger had watched her from a distance, standing across the street like the old man with the limp, waiting for a chance to speak, but never taking it. Benjamin understood Roger now. Not as a monster, but as a broken man who had tried to do the right thing and failed. Who had spent his whole life paying for one night of weakness. One decision to take a child instead of calling the police. One mistake that echoed for decades. The story of Grace was not about justice. It was about survival. About the quiet way that evil persists, not through explosions and screams, but through silence. Through sealed attics and painted windows, through diaries thrown into rivers, through letters burned in sinks. Benjamin survived by becoming invisible. By forgetting that he had ever known the name Grace. By pretending that the attic had never existed. Some nights, he almost believed it. But then he would close his eyes and see the painted sky, the blue clouds that never moved, the small bed in the corner. And he would hear a child's voice whispering, "I am still here. I am still waiting." Benjamin would open his eyes and stare at the ceiling of his rented room. He would whisper back, "I know. I am sorry." Then he would turn on the light and wait for morning. He never returned to White Pines. He never contacted Margaret. He never spoke to Laura again. He lived the rest of his life in Stillwater, working odd jobs and keeping to himself. And when he died, 23 years later, alone in his room above the garage, the landlord found a small box under his bed. Inside the box was a single photograph. A faded image of a little girl with dark hair and white eyes, sitting on a swing in a sunny yard. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Grace, before they took her, but I remember." The landlord threw the photograph away. And the story of Grace died with Benjamin. Or so it seemed. Because years later, a woman in her 50s visited White Pines. She had gray hair and sad eyes and walked with a slight limp. She went to the old house, now painted white with a new roof and a swing set in the yard. She stood at the gate and looked at the attic window. A young mother came out and asked if she needed help. The woman smiled and said, "No. I used to live here, a long time ago, in a different life." The young mother invited her inside for tea, but the woman shook her head and walked away. Back to her car, back to the highway, back to a home she had built with a new name, a new family, a new story. And as she drove, she looked in the rearview mirror at the house growing smaller. She whispered, "Thank you, Roger." Then she pressed the gas and did not look back. She never knew about Benjamin. Never knew about the diary or the river or the man with the scar. She only knew that someone had kept her safe. Someone had made sure she survived. And that was enough. The attic was empty now. The painted window had been torn down and replaced with real glass. Children played in the yard, and the footsteps were never heard again. But sometimes, on cold November nights, when the wind blew just right, the new owners would hear a soft creak from the attic. Not footsteps. Just the house settling. Just old Wood relaxing into sleep. And they would turn over in bed and close their eyes and dream of nothing at all. And that was the end of Grace's story. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. Not with justice, but with peace. The kind of peace that comes from being forgotten, from being left alone, from finally, after all those years, resting in silence.